My wife told the hospital chaplain to start planning a memorial service while I was still breathing on my own. I know that because the chaplain told me himself, 3 weeks later, standing in my driveway with his hat in his hands, looking like a man who didn't know he was about to become a witness. She had a boyfriend's toolbox in my garage before I even opened my eyes. She had a moving truck reserved before the surgeon finished stitching my chest closed. And the only reason I found out any of it was because my own sister-in-law leaned over my hospital bed on a Thursday night and whispered 11 words I will carry with me until the day I actually do die. My name is Walter Aldrich. Everybody calls me Walt. I'm 64 years old. I've run a marine engine repair shop on Tuttle Avenue in Sarasota, Florida, for 31 years, and I always believed the two most important things in a man's life were the work he does with his hands and the woman he comes home to. I built my whole life around that belief. I was wrong about one of them, and finding that out nearly killed me twice. Once in an ambulance, and once at my own kitchen table. This is one moment I'll remember for the rest of my life, and I want to tell it to you exactly the way it happened, in order, because the order is the whole point. Let me back up. I married Denise Colby on a Saturday in April, 29 years ago, at a little church off Bee Ridge Road that doesn't even exist anymore. It's a CVS now. I was 35. She was 31. I already had the shop by then, Aldrich Marine and Engine, running out of a cinder block building with 2 bay doors and a window unit that dripped onto the concrete floor. Denise worked the front desk at an orthodontist's office. She had a laugh that carried across a parking lot. And for the first 15 years of our marriage, I would have told you it was the best sound in the world. We built a good life. Not flashy. A 3-bedroom house on Siesta Vista Lane, half a mile off the water, with a lanai I screened in myself the summer of 2003. 2 kids. Our son Bryce, 31 now, works with me at the shop, has since he was 19, learned to rebuild an outboard motor before he learned to parallel park. Our daughter Callie lives up in Tampa with her husband and a toddler who calls me Pop Pop. By 2024, the shop had 4 full-time mechanics, a contract with 2 marinas on the bay, and enough business that I could finally slow down a little. I was 64 years old, I had a wife of 29 years, and I thought, genuinely thought, that the hard part of my life was behind me. It was a Wednesday in early March when everything changed. I was out at Marina Jack's, under a 42-foot Sea Ray with a fuel line problem, when I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as a fist closing around my ribs from the inside. I sat down on the dock. Hollis Vance, my shop partner of 20 years, was 2 boats over and saw me go down. He called 911 before I even finished saying his name. I remember the paramedic's face. I remember the AC of the ambulance. I remember Hollis's voice saying, "Stay with me, Walt, stay with me," over and over like a man trying to keep a fish on the line. I don't remember much after that. They told me later it was a 90% blockage in the left anterior descending artery. The kind cardiologists call the Widowmaker, and not because it's poetic. I was in surgery for 6 hours at Sarasota Bay Medical Center. Triple bypass. And when I came out of it, I wasn't really out of it at all. I was in that strange gray country between sedation and consciousness, where you can hear the world, but you can't answer it back. I want to be clear about this, because people ask me all the time whether I really heard the things I'm about to tell you, or whether I've built a story around fragments and grief. I've asked myself the same question 100 times since. But I know what I know, and what I know started on the second night, when I heard my wife's voice through what felt like a wall of wet cotton, and she was not talking to me. Here's the thing nobody tells you about that in-between place after major surgery. It's not sleep. It's not waking. It's more like being underwater in a pool with the lights off, and every so often someone drops a stone in, and the ripple reaches you as sound. Most of what happened those first 2 days, I've had to piece together from monitors and nurses' notes and my son's memory. But some of it I heard myself, clear as a bell dropped straight into my chest. Sarasota Bay Medical, Cardiac ICU, 4th floor. I know because I heard a nurse say the room number to another nurse, 4114, more times than I can count. The first voice I recognized clearly was Denise's, on what I later confirmed was day 2, talking to someone on the phone in the corner of my room. Her voice had that particular hush people use in hospital hallways, the one that pretends to be respectful but is really just trying not to get caught. "I know," she said. "I know. But Craig, I can't just leave right now. It would look terrible. I want you to sit with that name for a second the way I had to sit with it, lying there with a tube down my throat and no way to ask a single question. Craig. I didn't know a Craig. Not a friend, not a cousin, not a neighbor I could place. Just a name, floating there in my chest like a splinter I couldn't reach. The next thing I remember hearing was my daughter-in-law's voice. No, I'm sorry, it was my sister-in-law, Renata. Renata Colby, Denise's younger sister by 4 years. And here's a detail I have to give you because it matters for everything that comes after. Renata is a cardiac ICU nurse. Has been for 18 years. Not at some other hospital across town. At Sarasota Bay Medical, on the very same floor where they wheeled me after surgery. She wasn't officially my nurse of record. Hospital policy doesn't usually let family work a direct relative's case. But she was on shift, she was down the hall, and she made sure she was the one who came in during the quiet hours to check my lines and adjust my pillows, because that's who Renata has always been. The kind of person who shows up in the gaps other people leave open. Day 3, evening shift, is when it happened. I remember the particular quality of the light. Dim, blue-white, the kind hospitals use at night so they can pretend they're letting you rest. I remember the beep of the monitor, slower than it had been. And I remember Renata's hand on my wrist, checking my pulse the old-fashioned way even though the machine was doing it for her, because Renata never trusted a screen the way she trusted her own fingers. She leaned down close enough that I could smell the hand sanitizer and the faint trace of coffee. And she said it low, right against my ear, like she wasn't even sure I could hear her, but she needed to say it anyway. Your wife thinks you won't make it, Walt. I don't think that's true, but I think you need to wake up and prove her wrong. 11 words. I've counted them more times than I can tell you. And I want you to understand something about what it feels like to hear a sentence like that when you cannot move, cannot open your eyes, cannot ask a single follow-up question. It's like being handed a locked box and told there's a bomb inside, and you're not allowed to look at it. You're not allowed to put it down. You just have to carry it, silently, for as long as it takes your body to remember how to work again. I didn't know it yet, but that sentence was the first loose thread in a rope that was about to come completely undone. Over the next 4 days, I drifted in and out, and every time I surfaced even a little, I made myself listen. Don't react. Don't move. That thought became the only thing keeping me steady, more than any medication they had me on. I heard Denise on the phone again, this time not bothering to whisper because she must have assumed I was too far under to matter. The doctor said even if he wakes up, there could be brain involvement. They don't know yet. They won't know for weeks. That wasn't what any doctor had told her. I found that out later. She was building a story before she even had the facts to build it with. I heard Bryce, my son, in the hallway outside my door, his voice tight in a way I'd never heard from him. Mom, why is there a U-Haul reservation confirmation in your email? I saw it pop up on the shared calendar. A long silence. Then Denise's voice, flat and fast. It's for storage, Bryce. In case we need to move some of your father's things out of the garage for medical equipment. Don't read into everything. Storage. My garage. I built that garage with my own hands the same summer I screened in the lanai. There was nothing in there that needed a U-Haul unless someone was planning to put something else in its place. Day 5, I opened my eyes for real. Not the flickering half-consciousness of the days before, but real, sustained waking. The nurse on duty, not Renata, a young man named Perez, noticed first and called for the resident. There was noise, light, the particular controlled chaos of a hospital room when someone comes back further than expected. They ran their checks. What year is it? Do you know where you are? Can you squeeze my hand? I answered every question correctly, and somewhere in the middle of all that, Denise walked through the door. Her face did something complicated. I want to be fair, because fairness matters to me even now. There was relief on her face. Real relief, I believe that. But underneath it, for about half a second, something else moved across her features, something that looked less like joy and more like recalculation. The way a person's face changes when a plan they were counting on suddenly needs a new deadline. She hugged me. She cried into my shoulder and said, I was so scared I was going to lose you. I said, I know. I love you. And for the first time in 29 years of marriage, I meant one of those sentences and not the other, and I am not going to tell you which. They kept me another 8 days for recovery and cardiac rehab before releasing me. Bryce drove me home. Denise had made up the guest room downstairs, so I wouldn't have to manage stairs, which on the surface looked like thoughtfulness. I thanked her for it. And I want you to remember that detail, because it's going to matter a great deal later. The guest room downstairs, and exactly why she wanted me sleeping in it instead of our bedroom upstairs. I came home to Siesta Vista Lane on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, and I smiled at every single person who greeted me at that door. And I had absolutely nothing but time, and 11 words sitting in my chest like a splinter that had started, finally, to work its way toward the surface. Stay with me, because what I found in the 6 weeks that followed made that hospital whisper look like the gentlest part of the whole story. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a man who's decided to pay very close attention without letting anyone know he's paying attention. I lived inside that quiet for 6 weeks. Cardiac rehab gave me the perfect cover, 3 mornings a week at a clinic off Bee Ridge Road, plus doctor's orders to rest most afternoons. Nobody questions a heart patient who says he's tired. Nobody watches a man closely when he's supposedly the one being watched. The first thing I noticed, in week 1, was the garage. Denise had told the doctor and told Bryce that she wanted to clear space in there for a walk-in shower unit in case Walt has mobility issues. Reasonable enough on its face. Except when I finally worked up the strength to walk out there myself on a Thursday morning while she was at a hair appointment, there was no shower unit. There were 4 cardboard boxes stacked against the far wall and a rolling red tool chest that did not belong to me. I know every tool I own. I've owned tools longer than I've owned most relationships in my life. This chest had a nameplate sticker on the top drawer, half peeled, that read C. Mullins Construction. Craig. There was that name again, except now it had a last name and a trade attached to it. I didn't touch the boxes. I didn't say a word to Denise. I walked back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and I thought about my sister-in-law leaning over my hospital bed. I thought about a U-Haul reservation in a shared email calendar. And I made the first real decision of my recovery, one that had nothing to do with cardiac rehab and everything to do with survival of a different kind. I called Bryce that evening and asked him to come by the shop the next morning, before Hollis opened up, just the 2 of us. He showed up at 7:15 with 2 coffees from the gas station on Bahia Vista and a look on his face like a man bracing for bad news. "Dad," he said, sliding into the chair across from my desk, "you look better than you did 2 weeks ago, but you've got that face. The face you get right before you tell a customer their engine block is cracked. I need you to tell me something honestly," I said, "and I need you not to soften it because I just had heart surgery." "Okay, who's Craig Mullins?" Bryce's jaw did a thing I'd seen it do exactly twice before in his life. Once when his high school girlfriend cheated on him. Once when a supplier tried to shortchange us on a parts order. It's a very specific tightening, right along the hinge of the bone. "Where did you hear that name?" he said, and it wasn't really a question. "Your mother, on the phone, when she thought I couldn't hear anything. And there's a tool chest with his name on it sitting in my garage." Bryce was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly on the desk. "He does remodeling work," he finally said. "Mom hired him back in December. She said it was for the guest bathroom. He's been around a lot, Dad. More than a bathroom job should take. I noticed it before you got sick. Actually, I just didn't want to say anything, because what was I going to say? Hey, Dad, I think Mom's contractor is at the house a lot. That's not exactly evidence of anything. When did you start thinking it might be more than a contractor?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched my son decide to stop protecting his mother's version of events and start telling me the truth. "2 nights before your surgery," he said. "I mean before you had the heart attack. I stopped by to grab the trailer hitch from the garage, and his truck was in the driveway at 10:30 at night. No work lights on. No tools out. Just his truck." He paused. "I told myself it was nothing, Dad. I really did. I didn't say anything for a while." Hollis's key turned in the front door of the shop right around then, early as usual, and Bryce and I both went quiet like 2 men who'd been caught at something, even though we hadn't done a single thing wrong. I told Bryce I needed him to keep his eyes open and his mouth shut for a little while longer, and that I was going to handle this the way I handle everything, slowly, and with all the facts lined up before I said a single word. That afternoon, I called Dana Whitfield. Dana's office sits on Fruitville Road, a small firm, mostly family law and estate work, and I'd used her once before, years ago, to update our wills after Callie was born. Not our family attorney. Denise had never met Dana, had no reason to think of her at all, which was exactly why I called her instead of the lawyer we'd used for the house closing, a man Denise had lunch with twice a year at the country club. Walt, Dana said when I sat down across from her desk, you sound like a man who's about to ask me something he already knows the answer to. I need you to assume my wife has been unfaithful and possibly moving assets, I said, and I need you to help me find out exactly how far it's gone before I say a word to anyone. Dana didn't blink. She's built like that, steady, unbothered, the kind of woman who's heard worse before her second cup of coffee. All right, she said. Let's find out. That was the beginning of the real work. And here's where I need you to stay with me, because what came out over the following 10 days rearranged everything I thought I understood about the 29 years I'd just spent building a life with Denise Colby. If this is your first time here, welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge Stories. Grab a coffee, get comfortable, because this one only gets heavier from here. If you've been with us before, you already know what I'm about to say. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time, because you do not want to miss what my sister-in-law handed me 8 days later. Dana called me on a Monday morning, exactly 9 days after our first meeting, and asked me to come in and sit down before she showed me anything. I drove myself for the first time since the surgery, which my cardiologist would not have approved of, and I parked behind her building on a side street off Fruitville and walked in feeling steadier than I had in a month. She had a folder on her desk about an inch thick. Your wife has power of attorney paperwork drawn up, Dana said. Not filed yet. Drafted by an attorney named Greg Osei, out of a firm in Bradenton, somewhere she'd have no obvious reason to use unless she wanted distance from anyone who knows your family. The document would have given her full authority over your finances, your accounts, and critically, decision-making power over your medical care, effective the moment 2 physicians certified you as incapacitated. When was this drafted? Dana turned a page. The engagement letter is dated the day after your surgery. Day 2, Walt. While you were still sedated in the ICU. I sat with that for a long moment. I thought about Denise's voice through the wet cotton of that gray country, saying the words there could be brain involvement into her phone, building a diagnosis out of thin air before a single doctor had said anything of the kind. She wasn't hoping I'd get better. She was laying groundwork for the version of events where I didn't. There's more, Dana said. Of course there was. Renata called me 3 days ago. Your sister-in-law. She got my number from Bryce. That stopped me cold. Renata called you? She wanted me to know something before it happened, because she was afraid that if she waited, it would be too late to stop. Dana slid a single sheet across the desk. It was a printout of a hospital visitor log. On day 4 of your admission, your wife brought a document to your room during a window when you were still heavily sedated but breathing on your own. A stack of papers she told the floor nurse were just insurance forms that need his signature while he's lucid enough to sign. Renata was the one who intercepted it. She read the top page before Denise could get it in front of you. It wasn't an insurance form. It was the power of attorney. I felt something in my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery. She was going to get me to sign it while I was drugged. Renata stopped her, Dana said. Told her hospital policy required a cognitive assessment before any legal document could be witnessed and signed at bedside, which is true, and which bought enough time that your wife had to leave with the papers and signed. Renata never told you this in the moment because you weren't in any state to hear it. She told me instead and asked me to make sure it reached you the second you were strong enough to do something with it. I sat back in that chair on Fruitville Road and felt something shift in my chest, and it wasn't grief anymore, not exactly. It was clarity, the kind that arrives cold and stays that way. My wife had tried to put a pin in my unconscious hand. My sister-in-law had stopped her, and then quietly, carefully, made sure I would eventually know the truth without ever putting herself in danger of Denise finding out early. There's a financial piece too, Dana said, and I braced myself. 3 withdrawals from your joint money market account in the 6 weeks before your surgery, totaling $41,000, wired to an account under a business name, Mullins Craftsman Renovations, LLC. And after your surgery, while you were still in the hospital, she opened a new individual checking account in her name only and moved another $60,000 into it from your joint savings. That account currently shows a balance of $9,000. The rest has been spent, cash withdrawals, a deposit to a rental company in Northport, and a payment to a moving service. Northport. That's where I later learned Craig Mullins kept a rental unit he was planning to give up because the actual plan, according to what Dana's investigator dug up over the following week, was for Craig to move into our house on Siesta Vista Lane the moment I was pronounced either gone or permanently incapacitated. Denise had told two of her closest friends, according to phone records and a very talkative neighbor named Fern Castellano, that she'd already accepted she might be a widow soon and that she deserved to finally be happy. She said that 11 days after my bypass surgery, while I was still doing laps around the cardiac rehab parking lot holding onto a rail. I didn't know it yet, but the worst piece of evidence was still sitting 3 weeks in the future, waiting for a night I hadn't planned yet, in a room full of people who had no idea what they were about to witness. I spent the next 2 weeks doing exactly what I do best. Working the problem slowly, methodically, the way I diagnose a fuel system that wasn't feeding right. Trace the line back to the source. Don't guess. Don't rush. Don't tip your hand until you know exactly where the leak is. I kept going to cardiac rehab. I kept smiling at Denise across the dinner table. I let her fuss over my medications and remind me to take my walks. And every single kindness she showed me during those 2 weeks, I understood now, was theater for an audience of exactly one. Herself, performing the role of devoted wife in case anyone, including me, ever needed to be convinced. Dana's investigator, a retired detective named Ruth Palacio who worked mostly insurance fraud cases now, put together the full financial picture by the second week of May. $101,000 moved out of accounts I'd built over 3 decades. A power of attorney document, and signed but drafted and ready, sitting in a Bradenton attorney's file waiting for a moment of weakness. A rental deposit in Northport under Craig Mullins's name. Canceled the week I woke up, because the plan had needed me to stay unconscious a little longer than I did. And Renata Colby, who could have said nothing, who could have stayed neutral the way plenty of family members do when it's easier not to choose sides, who instead put her own relationship with her sister on the line to make sure I woke up to the truth instead of a signature I never agreed to. There was one more piece Dana wanted before we moved. She'd learned, through Ruth's digging, that Craig Mullins had a pattern. 2 prior relationships with women whose husbands had health scares, both of which had ended with Craig moving into a home he didn't pay for, and then moving out again within a year, considerably richer than when he'd arrived. He wasn't just Denise's contractor and her boyfriend. He was, by every indication we could find, a man who had done this exact thing before, more than once, and gotten away clean each time because the wounded husband either never found out or found out too late to do anything but sign the divorce papers and disappear. Not this time. Our anniversary was 9 days away when Dana finished her file. Denise had already started talking about it at dinner, the way she had every year for 2 decades. Should we do something small? Should we invite the Castellanos? Maybe dinner on the lanai. This year, though, there was something different underneath her voice when she brought it up, something almost sentimental, and I understood exactly why. In her mind, this might be one of the last performances she'd ever have to give. In her mind, the curtain was already coming down on our marriage, on her terms, at a time and in a way she controlled. She had no idea I'd already read the whole script. Let's do it properly, I told her. Invite everyone. The Castellanos, Hollis and his wife, your sister, Bryce and Callie and the family. Make it a real celebration. She smiled at me across the table, reached over, and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. 29 years of our particular version of that gesture, and I let myself feel, just for a moment, the weight of everything that hand had once meant to me before I set it aside and went back to planning. Our anniversary fell on a Saturday in late May, warm enough that the humidity had started rolling in off the Gulf every evening around 6. Denise handled the party the way she handled most social occasions. With real skill, I'll give her that. She rented string lights for the lanai, ordered catering from a place on Main Street downtown, printed little menu cards like it was a wedding reception instead of a backyard gathering for 20 people. She even had a banner made. 29 years, it read, with a little watercolor image of 2 wedding rings. I saw it laid out on the dining room table 3 days before the party and stood there looking at it for longer than I meant to. 29 years. Sure, let's celebrate that. The evening of the party, guests started arriving around 6:30. Fern and her husband from 2 doors down. Hollis and his wife Marisol, who'd known Denise almost as long as I had. Our pastor from the little Lutheran church off Proctor Road. Callie flew down from Tampa with her husband and left the toddler with a sitter, which told me she understood this wasn't going to be an ordinary evening. I'd asked her, carefully, to be there without telling her exactly why. Bryce arrived early to help set up chairs, and Renata came in quiet, the way she always does, hugging Denise at the door with a warmth I now understood was costing her more than anyone in that yard could imagine. By 8 o'clock the lanai was full, glasses clinking, the smell of the caterer's shrimp and grits drifting out over the pool, string lights doing their job against the darkening sky. Denise moved through the crowd in a pale yellow dress, laughing that laugh I used to think was the best sound in the world. Craig Mullins was not invited, obviously, but I want you to understand something. I hadn't ruled out the possibility that she'd try to have him show up anyway, some excuse about checking on the bathroom renovation. She didn't. Maybe some part of her still had the sense to know that would be a bridge too far. Small mercies. I walked to the center of the lanai around 8:15, picked up a fork, and tapped the side of my glass. The yard went quiet the way yards do when people sense something is coming. Can I get everyone's attention for a minute? Denise turned, smiling that public smile she'd worn like a piece of jewelry all night. Bryce set down his drink. Renata went very still near the pool's edge, watching me with an expression I can only describe as bracing. 29 years, I said. That's a long time to build something with somebody. You go through a lot. You make choices every single day that you trust are going to matter, that are going to be worth something down the line. Somebody near the back said, "Amen to that," and a few people laughed softly. Nearly dying has a way of clarifying things, I went on. I want to share something I learned this spring on the 4th floor of Sarasota Bay Medical Center, because I think everyone standing here deserves to understand what actually happened to this family while I was in that hospital bed. Denise's smile didn't drop all at once. I watched it drain the way water leaves a tub, slow, and then all at once at the very end. She glanced toward Renata, and something passed between the two sisters that I understood immediately was Denise realizing exactly who had talked. I had brought 2 folders out to a side table earlier that evening, tucked under a stack of extra napkins where nobody would think to look. I picked up the first one now and held it, not opening it yet. While I was under sedation, unable to speak or move, I said, my voice steady, calm, the way I talk when I'm explaining a repair to a customer who's about to get bad news about their engine. My wife had a power of attorney document drafted, dated the day after my surgery. It would have given her full control over my finances and my medical decisions the moment 2 doctors declared me incapacitated. She brought that document to my hospital room 4 days into my stay and attempted to have me sign it while I was too sedated to understand what I was signing. The lanai had gone completely silent. Somewhere behind me, I heard a glass set down carefully on a table. She wasn't able to, because a nurse on that floor recognized what was actually in that stack of papers and stopped it from happening. That nurse is standing right here tonight. I looked at Renata, my sister-in-law. Every head in that yard turned toward Renata Colby, who stood very still by the pool with her hands folded in front of her, chin up, the posture of someone who had known this moment was coming and had decided, weeks ago, to meet it without flinching. "Walt," Denise said, and her voice had gone thin, "this is not the place." "I'm not finished." I kept my voice level. During my recovery, I learned that $101,000 moved out of our joint accounts in the 6 weeks before and after my surgery. Some of it went to a contractor named Craig Mullins, who has been renovating far more than our guest bathroom for the better part of 5 months. Some of it went toward a rental deposit in Northport, reserved, and then canceled the week I woke up sooner than expected. I opened the folder and held up a single page, bank statements. The account names blacked out for everyone but Denise, who knew exactly what she was looking at. And 2 friends of my wife's have confirmed, separately, that she told them she'd already accepted she might be a widow soon, and that she deserved to finally be happy. She said that 11 days after my heart surgery. Fern Castellano's hand went to her mouth. Marisol reached for Hollis's arm. Our pastor looked at the ground like a man wishing very hard he'd left 20 minutes earlier. Denise's face had gone the color of the tablecloth behind her. "You don't understand what those months were like for me," she said, and her voice had an edge of desperation now, reaching for a version of the story that might still hold. "You were always at that shop, Walt, always working. I was lonely. I'm not interested in the reasons tonight," I said, "and I want you to notice something. I never raised my voice, not once, the whole time. I spent 29 years building this life, so you'd never have to be lonely a day in it. Whatever loneliness you felt, you didn't come to me with it. You went to a man who's done this exact thing to 2 other families before ours, moved himself into a sick man's house, and out again a year later, considerably richer. I let that land. My lawyer filed the divorce petition on Thursday. The financial disclosures alone are going to make this a very simple process, because there isn't much room to argue when there's a paper trail this clean. Denise didn't say anything else. She stood there in her pale yellow dress, under string lights she'd rented for an anniversary that had just become something else entirely, and 20 people watched her have absolutely nothing left to say. I want to pause here, because this is the part of the story where a lot of people expect me to describe some enormous, satisfying collapse. Denise breaking down, begging, the whole yard turning against her in some dramatic wave. That's not quite what happened, and I think the truth is more useful than the version that would play better as a movie scene. What actually happened is that the party simply ended. Quietly. Fern and her husband made an excuse about an early morning and left within 10 minutes. The pastor shook my hand at the door, said very little, and told me he'd call me during the week. Hollis clapped me on the shoulder on his way out and said, "Proud of you, Walt," in a voice thick enough that I understood exactly what it cost him to say it steady. By 9:30, the lanai was empty except for me, Bryce, Callie, and Renata, standing among half-finished plates of shrimp and grits under lights that suddenly looked a little foolish. 29 years spelled out in watercolor on a banner nobody was going to take down that night. Now let me tell you what happened over the 6 weeks after that, because the sweetest part of this story isn't the confrontation. It's what came after. Denise moved out within 10 days, into a short-term rental, and I later learned, through Bryce, who kept a careful, respectful distance from his mother without ever fully cutting her off, which I respected him for, that Craig Mullins did not, in fact, follow through on any plan to build a life with her once the money stopped flowing and the story became public in our small circle of friends. He stopped returning her calls within a month. I take no particular pleasure in that, but I won't pretend I was surprised either. The divorce settlement, once Dana Whitfield finished laying out the financial trail for the mediator, moved faster and cleaner than either of us expected. Denise received a fair portion under Florida law. I want to be clear about that, because I never tried to leave her with nothing, only to make sure she didn't leave with what she'd stolen on top of what she was legally owed. The $101,000 she'd moved was accounted for and subtracted from her share. The house on Siesta Vista Lane stayed with me. I sold it 8 months later anyway. Too many rooms holding too many memories that didn't feel like mine to keep, and bought a smaller place closer to the shop, with a dock out back just big enough for the boat Bryce and I had been talking about restoring for years. But here's the part one actually want you to sit with, because it's the reason I'm telling you this story at all. Renata Colby put her relationship with her only sister at risk to make sure I woke up to the truth instead of a forged signature. She did it quietly, without asking for a single thing in return, the way genuinely good people usually do. When the divorce settled and I sat down with Dana to update my estate plan, the first thing I did was set up a trust, not enormous, but meaningful, enough to pay off the remainder of her mortgage on a little house she'd been struggling with since her own divorce 4 years earlier, and enough left over to cover her daughter's last 2 years of nursing school outright. When I told her what I'd done, sitting across from her at a diner off Bahia Vista on a Tuesday morning, she cried in a way I don't think I'd ever seen her cry before, not even at our own mother-in-law's funeral years back. I didn't do it for anything, Walt, she kept saying, and I told her, that's exactly why she deserved it. Bryce, too. I brought him in as a full partner at the shop that summer, put his name on the sign next to mine. Aldridge and Aldridge Marine and Engine, something I'd always planned to do eventually, but moved up considerably once I understood how steady he'd been through the whole thing, how he'd chosen truth over comfort even when it meant hard conversations with his own mother. Callie flew down more often after that spring than she had in the 2 years before it, and I understood that some things, even good things, need a scare like the one I had to remind everyone involved what actually matters. I think about that whisper a lot. Your wife thinks you won't make it. I don't think that's true, but I think you need to wake up and prove her wrong. 11 words, delivered by a woman risking her own family relationships to give them to me, at a moment when I couldn't so much as open my eyes to thank her. I did wake up. I did prove Denise wrong, though not in the way either of us expected on that Thursday night in a fourth-floor hospital room. And I've come to believe that the truest measure of the people around you isn't how they behave when everything's going well. It's what they do in the room where they think you can't hear them at all. Some nights now, out on that new dock behind the smaller house, I think about how close I came to signing a document I never would have agreed to. In a hospital bed, I might never have woken up from clear-headed enough to stop it. And I think about a nurse leaning close in the blue-white light of an ICU room, choosing, in a moment that cost her something real, to tell a half-conscious man the truth instead of letting him drift back under. I owe her more than a mortgage payment and a nursing degree for her daughter. I owe her the rest of whatever years I've got left, spent paying attention to the people who show up in the rooms where it would have been easier not to. If you've made it this far, I hope this one reminded you of something worth holding on to. That the people who whisper the truth to you when you're at your weakest are the ones worth building the rest of your life around. If this story moved you, hit that like button, leave a comment, and tell us where you're listening from tonight, and subscribe to Sweet Family Revenge Stories so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.